Hi there, my name is David Kenney, and welcome to our program, Light from Above. We're broadcasting from Wadsworth, Ohio. Glad you could be with us on the program today. Today we're talking about a very important question. Do you know Jesus? There's a hymn out there that asks that question. Do you know Jesus? Do you know my Jesus? And the song asks the question, do you know my Jesus? Do you know my friend? Have you heard he loves you and that he will abide till the end? You know, a lot of people they follow different people, they admire different people for different reasons, maybe their teachings or maybe their examples or things that inspire them to do that. But Jesus stands apart from these people. Jesus isn't just some mere man. He wasn't just a good moral teacher, as some people will say. Some people say, well, he wasn't just a good moral teacher, he was a prophet. But then they don't want to go any further than that. They want to deny that he's the Son of God. And that's what we're talking about today. Did Jesus claim to be divine? Because we have some movements that try to say that he never claimed that, or that they deny that he actually was. Let me give you an example. Some of these will not be surprising to you, I'm sure, if you're familiar with basically world religions. But one of them is, Judaism denies that Jesus is the Messiah. They deny that he's the Son of God. For example, take a look at this quote from Martin Buber. Martin Buber was a Hebrew scholar. He was a philosopher. He lived from 1878 to 1965. It's interesting, he resigned a position. He had an honorary professorship at the University of Frankfurt in 1930, and he resigned it when the Nazis came to power, when Adolf Hitler came to power. And he resisted the Nazis, even to the point of censorship. And he would go and leave. He was actually born in Austria, I believe, and he would leave there and go and settle in Jerusalem in 1938, and he taught there at the Hebrew University. And he's a very popular writer for Judaism. For example, I came across a quote, this is on Wikipedia. It was talking about he was nominated 126th of the 200th greatest Israelis of all time, according to a popular publication they put out. So Martin Buber is a very respected figure among Judaism. And I grabbed this quote from the book, Essential Judaism, A Complete Guide to Beliefs, Customs, and Rituals, written by George Robinson. And this is a quote from his book. And notice the part that I underlined there. This is Buber's teaching. He says, while Jesus is a great teacher and a great historical figure, as a Jew, he cannot accept Jesus as the Messiah. So, that's important to note. It's interesting, he doesn't deny that Jesus was a historical figure. And if you remember prior programs, we talked about that, how some people tried to deny there ever was a person named Jesus. Well, Judaism doesn't do that. They don't deny him. Now, there might be some within Judaism that does that. But as a whole, they don't deny that he existed. And that's important to note. But they deny that he was the Messiah. They deny that part of it. They want to say, sometimes you'll hear them say, well, he was a great teacher. He was among the best teachers. He was a great moral instructor, but he wasn't the Messiah. He taught a lot of great things if the people are being very complimentary towards him. That's the way they'll do that, but they'll deny that he's the Messiah. And when you deny the Messiahship, you need to understand, that's not just denying him as his rightful position, but that's also denying his deity. That all goes together with that. So Judaism, different people have different views of him within Judaism, but they tend to deny that he's the Messiah. They reject him as the Son of God. Another example would be Islam. Take a look at this statement. This is from Islam in Focus, or Islam on Focus, in Focus. And this book came out quite a while ago, and I grabbed this quote from it. It's quite long. It's actually 2 pages, 2 screens here. And I just want to point out a few things from the quotation, just to give you an idea what the Muslim view of Jesus is. Notice it says that they accept Jesus not only as a historical fact, but also as one of the most distinguished apostles of God. And some of the other things that I've read or heard Muslims state when I talk to them is they'll say something like, well, Jesus was a great prophet, but Muhammad was a greater prophet. Jesus is just a prophet among prophets, but Muhammad is the prophet that we should listen to. And they may not mean anything derogatory towards Jesus intentionally, but let's take a look at this other statement that they have on the second slide of this quotation. He said, notice that a Muslim is happily denied the liberty of defaming Jesus or any other prophet. And it says, although very unpopular among Christians, the Islamic beliefs about Jesus do not intend in any way to belittle his role or underestimate his character or degrade his personality. Now, one thing you need to understand about this statement, and I'm not disputing whether or not Muslims intend or to show disrespect for Jesus. I'm not doubting what they're saying here. But what you need to understand is when they say that although very popular among Christians, and they don't want to be offensive, they don't understand that the term Christian means Christ-like. And the term Christ-like, like Christ is the same term as Messiah. So people who are Christians, who follow Jesus, who follow him as the Christ, are saying that he is the Christ, he is the Messiah. But the Muslims, they deny that. And notice it says that, in fact, the Muslim is more respectful of Jesus than many Christians. Now, to me, that's a puzzling statement. Now, I imagine probably, and I don't know this, the writer's name's down there, I don't know exactly what he has in mind with that statement. He may mean that there are people who say they're followers of Jesus, but their lives and the things that come out of their mouth deny that. Well, that would be true. If we're not following the teachings and examples of Jesus, and we call ourselves Christians, we're being inconsistent with that. And if that's what they're talking about, then that's one thing. But you can't say that if you hold to Jesus, but you deny he's the Christ, that you're being just as respectful as any other Christian, any Christian who's following Christ to the best of their ability. That's just not accurate. So we talked about the Jews, they deny that he was the Messiah. They don't deny he's a historical figure. They'll say he is a good moral teacher. Muslims do this, basically the same thing. They'll say, well, he's a prophet. He was sent from God, and he taught a lot of good things, and he was a good prophet and all that. But Muhammad's really the one that we need to look at. Now, Islam and Judaism, they have their differences, but the way that they look at Jesus is basically the same. They're willing to say he lived, he was a good teacher, even a prophet, but he wasn't the Messiah. He wasn't the Son of God. He wasn't divine. That's what they're saying with that. But they're not the only ones that do that. Atheists, they deny the deity of Christ. Now take a look at this quote. This is from Bertrand Russell's book. I had this on a program before. He was the winner of the Nobel Prize. He lived from 1872 to 1970. He's one of the more popular foes of Christianity. He wrote this book, his essays, Why I Am Not a Christian, which we quoted last time. He points out that for one to profess to be a Christian, he must believe Christ was divine, or at least the best and wisest of men. Now, he says, I don't think that Christ was the best and wisest of men, although I grant him a certain very high degree of moral goodness. Now, that's a perplexing statement that he has there. Russell's view of Jesus is that he never existed at all. And we talked about the last program. He doesn't even admit that he exists. Now, how can he do that? Well, let me explain to you what Russell's view is to the best of my knowledge. Russell's basically saying the Jesus in the Bible, in the New Testament, in the Gospels, he's saying now that Jesus has a very high degree of moral goodness. But he'll go on to say that Jesus is a work of fiction. He'll say, well, that's just what these writers came together and they got together and they wrote these books and they put it out there. The Jesus never actually existed. He's sort of something they conjured up, that they wrote about. And all these teachings and everything that Jesus reportedly said in these Gospels, oh, they're great. They're fantastic, Russell would say. And that's why he's saying that. So he denies that Jesus ever existed, but he'll say that the writings of Jesus he respects very much. And for example, one of the things he says is the moral teachings of Jesus are excellent. The golden rule, the love neighbor as yourself, love God with all your heart, soul, strength, mind, your enemies. Those are all good things. But if he claimed to be the Son of God, if he claimed to be the Messiah, if he claimed to be God, would he be a good moral teacher? Would he be a good moral teacher? See, Russell misses that point. Jesus was more than a good moral teacher. And Russell misses that point. Now take a look at this next slide. This is what we're arguing about right now. When one considers Jesus' actions and Jesus' claims as revealed in the New Testament, one cannot accept Jesus as just a good moral teacher or just a prophet. Now, we've already looked at some things outside of the Bible. Sometimes that's called extra-biblical evidence. We've looked at some of those things, and we could tell some things about Jesus, that he definitely existed, that he was crucified and all that. But where do you go to find the religious instructions of Jesus? Well, you can't ignore the New Testament. And that's one of the reasons why they attack the New Testament. They don't want the things that Jesus taught. They want to reject that. This is why they seek to deny he existed. This is why they seek to deny the apostles of Jesus, saying that he misrepresented his teaching. This is why some seek to displace the Gospels, the canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they try to substitute it with these other Gospels. That's why you see attacks along those lines. But what does the Bible say? What does the New Testament teach? What does it say about Jesus' actions? We'll look at 4 examples. What did it say about Jesus' claims? We'll look at 4 examples of that too. And what I want you to notice as we get through this program, you can't hold to the New Testament and hold this idea that Jesus was just a good moral teacher, or he was just a prophet. He never claimed to be the Son of God. He never did anything like that at all. You have a choice to make. Either you're going to accept the Jesus of the New Testament and reject these theories, or the other way around. And that's really what's at stake. That's why you see a lot of writings about this very subject, because the matter is so serious and it's being very much debated in various circles of our nation. So these matters are very important. So let's take a look at some examples that Jesus gave in his actions and his claims. So let's look first at his actions. Here's the first one. Notice this passage. Then they were all amazed, so they questioned among themselves, saying, "What is this? What new doctrine is this? For with authority he commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." Now this is the assessment of people who were actually there when Jesus taught. And notice he taught them with authority and with power. Well, the unclean spirits and demons and things like that, Jesus had authority over it. He had power over them, to the point that one of the criticisms that his antagonists would say was, well, he's just the head of the demons. He's the prince of the demons. That's how he can do that. But they missed the point. They missed it completely, or they didn't want to see it. Jesus was powerful. He was powerful enough to subjugate them, to do away with them. That was the power that he had, and that power gave him that authority. And he demonstrated it back and forth. So Jesus taught both with authority and he backed it up with power. Let's take a look at another example of the actions of Jesus. The action of Jesus demonstrated power over the weather. Notice it says, "And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that it was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' Then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, 'Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?' And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, 'Who can this be, that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" See, Jesus demonstrated he's not just a good moral teacher. He has the power to back it up. And he did that. He was asleep. And it's interesting, Jesus already knew what his mission was. He knew he was going to the cross. He knew he was going to die. He knew he was going to be in the tomb, and he was going to come out of there. He knew he wasn't going to die in a boat on the Sea of Galilee. He knew that. That's why you could say, well, you have little faith. He knew what his mission was. And it's interesting that their reaction when he did that, they're afraid of him. They were exceedingly fearful of him. And that's something that, people seem to be missing today, a very healthy respect for the identity of Jesus. Let's take a look at another one. He demonstrated his authority and power to forgive sins. This is something that he backed up with his healing of the paralytic. You remember the paralytic they brought to him, they cut the hole into the ceiling, they lowered him in there. And this is what the record states. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven you." And some of the scribes were sitting there and reasoning in their hearts, "Why does this man speak blasphemies like this? Who can forgive sins but God alone?" But immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they reasoned thus within themselves, he said to them, "Why do you reason about these things in your hearts? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven you,' or to say, 'Arise, take up your bed and walk'? But that you may know that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralytic, you know the story, "Rise up and walk." And that's what he did. He backed that up with power. And what is he backing up? The scribes are right. Who is this? Only God can forgive sins. Well, Jesus doesn't dispute that. He is God. He did forgive sins, and he backed it up by healing that paralytic. He wasn't just a good moral teacher. He wasn't just a prophet. He's the Son of God. He's divine. He proved it. Let's take a look at another one. He demonstrated power over death. In John 11:41 through 44, it says, "Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying." The dead man is Lazarus. "And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, 'Father, I thank you that you heard me, and I know that you always hear me, but because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me.' Now when he had said these things, he cried forth a loud voice, 'Lazarus, come forth.' And he who had died came out, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to him, 'Loose him and let him go.'" One of the powerful thoughts about this, as I hear people talk about it, is the idea that when Jesus called Lazarus by name, some people say, well, it's a good thing he called him by name, or the whole cemetery might have emptied out. And that's really a powerful thought when you think about it. The resurrection of Lazarus was very powerful. If you go and you read on further in the record of John, he'll point out they tried, the enemies of Jesus, they tried to kill Lazarus too. Why? Because Lazarus coming out of that tomb was confirmation of what Jesus said. "You're my Father, I'm your Son, you hear me, I want everybody to know you hear me, I'm going to demonstrate this, Lazarus, you come forth." See, Jesus claimed to be more than just a good moral teacher, and he backed it up. He would go on to back it up with his own resurrection. The crowning miracle of the Bible, as I've heard it called. If you can believe the resurrection of Christ, you can believe the rest of the Bible. There's no problem with that. That's why some people call it the crowning miracle of the Bible. And it's very powerful. Well, let's talk about some of the claims that Jesus made. He didn't just back up things with power. He made specific claims. Let's take a look at this one in John chapter 4, 25 through 26. He's talking to the Samaritan woman at the well. The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." Now, Jesus is telling her, I am Messiah. I am the Christ. For people who don't realize this, I'll point this out. When people use Jesus' name in vain or blasphemously, and they'll say, well, Jesus Christ this, Jesus Christ that, you need to understand that Christ is not his last name. Christ is who he was. Messiah and Christ are synonymous terms. The Messiah is the Hebrew version of it. Christ is the Greek version of it. They refer to the same thing, the Anointed One, the Son of God. It's interesting that the term Son of God occurs some 40 times in the New Testament. And it's always surrounding events around Jesus. See, Jesus claimed to be more than just a good moral teacher. Let's take a look at another one of his claims. The next one here, he claimed he is the only way to the Father. This is a very controversial verse. You wouldn't think it would be, but in today's society it is. It says, Jesus said to them, "I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Now, notice that Jesus is saying, notice the "these" there. The way, the truth, the life. But notice, no one comes to the Father except through him. Now, that is an astonishing claim. People who rejected him as the Messiah, who didn't believe he was the Christ, who thought the people were being led astray by him, what do you think their reaction would want to be? Well, they wanted to do away with him, especially since he was drawing people away from them and taking their power away. Jesus had enemies. He had vicious enemies. And we know how he was crucified on the cross because of those enemies. Jesus pointed out, you can't come to the Father except through me. Some people, they reject that. Jesus was an exclusionist. And that's something that people need to realize is one of his claims. Another one, in John chapter 14 and verse 6, Jesus claimed that his teaching is the standard of judgment. Notice he says, he who rejects me does not receive my words, has that which judges him, the word that I have spoken will judge him in the last day. John chapter 12. Now, it's important to note that, actually I think that's John 12:48. But it's important to note that, contract specialists or people that deal with contracts, sometimes they'll outsource that kind of thing. Maybe you're in a company and you outsource your legal department. Maybe you outsource your purchasing department. And maybe you let other people read your contracts and you deal with that. And you say, well, I really don't have time to mess with that. I have these other things to do. We need to understand the New Testament is a contract. It is the most important contract in your life. Don't you think you ought to read it? Don't you think you ought to read it? I mean, you're talking about your soul. You're not talking about a deal on a car or a purchasing arrangement between a buyer and a supplier. You're talking about your soul. Don't you think you should read it? Don't outsource it. I mean, don't take my word for these things. Don't take, wherever you go to worship, whoever's, delivering messages to you, always go to the Bible and look what it says. Make sure you're checking that out. Be aware of that. Also, Jesus claimed that he would judge the world. This is another one of his claims. Notice what it says in Matthew chapter 7, 21 and 23. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Now notice that Jesus is saying he's going to be the judge. It isn't just that he's saying the words that I spoke are going to judge you. He is actually going to be there. And notice that he says that many will come to me and say, didn't we do all these great things? You have a lot of people, religious people, they do a lot of great things. We have all kinds of food drives and all kinds of charity things and that different religious groups do. And I understand they want to do good things. They're trying to follow Jesus to the best that they know. But let me encourage you to be mindful that, that term there, lawlessness, that term lawlessness there doesn't mean they didn't have a law. No, what that term lawlessness means, if you look it up, what that term means is they took the law and twisted it, perverted it. They reshaped it the way that they wanted to do. They didn't really go back and look at what Jesus told them to do. They did what they wanted to do. Jesus is not going to accept that. Jesus is not going to accept it. And all these people that stand before him and say, well, wait a minute, we did all these great things. We had these raffles for you. We had these breakfast dinners for you. And we went and did the things for the sick and all that. And Jesus tells them, you have to follow his word. He is going to be the judge. His words will be what judges. Well, let's take a look at, as we close up, did Jesus claim to be divine? Well, his actions demonstrated it. He taught with authority and power. He demonstrated his power over nature. He demonstrated his authority to forgive sins by healing. He demonstrated his authority to conquer death of others by conquering himself. His claims. He claimed to be the Messiah. He claimed to be the Christ. He said that the only way you can get to the Father was through him. He set the standards of judgment, his word, as revealed in the New Testament. That's what we're going to be judged by. And we will be judged. He will be the judge of the world. Now, we could have cited a whole kinds of things to help back that up. But let me ask you this question. When you die, Jesus will be with you all the way to the end. And you die, he's going to call you out of that grave. Now my question is, when he calls you out of that grave, will you be his friend? Thanks for watching today. Program today, we'd like to take a moment and review this roadmap to heaven with you since the matter is so serious. There are many incorrect set of directions out there, and sadly so many people are following them. For example, some people have been given wrong turns. They believe things such as faith only, works only, or grace only. Or some attempt to change the order of the turns, being baptized before they even believe. Some people fail to realize what point they are on the map. Don't even open their Bibles yet, and they think they're saved already. As a person travels in a car or takes a hike, has to follow the proper directions, so we must follow the proper directions to heaven. Let's take a look at the directions on our roadmap to heaven here. You have to look at these passages in your Bible for yourself. We'll just list the steps, the turns on the way. First is to believe or to have faith. And then number 2, to repent, to turn away from sin. Number 3 is to confess that Jesus is the Son of God. Number 4 is immersion, or to be baptized, which is a burial in water to have your sins washed away. And then you're added to the church by the Lord, not by a group of people, or not by giving some kind of testimonial experience or things like that. And then once you're added, you need to serve and worship the Lord faithfully all the days of your life. And the key word's faithfully. You don't waver. And that's very important. We need to keep in mind, too, that in Noah's day there was a big flood, and only people in the ark were saved from the flood. The same is true today. There is no salvation outside the Lord's church. Where are you on the roadmap to heaven? Thanks for watching our program. Please let us know if we can assist you with further information for your journey.